The silence had a sound, and Kalen was one of the few who could hear it. For him, the void was never empty. It was a library of ghosts, a tapestry woven from the final moments of forgotten lives. As an echo prospector, he navigated his Rust Bucket Scout, the stray dog, through the graveyards of fallen empires, his mind a sensitive receiver for the psychic residue left behind by Cataclysm. He sifted through the phantom screams of long-dead gunners, the tearful whispers of mothers clutching their children in doomed colony ships, the arrogant final thoughts of admirals whose fleets had been turned to dust. It was a grim living, trading in the currency of tragedy, selling salvage coordinates gleaned from the emotional resonance of disaster. Most people saw him and his kind as ghouls, scavengers of sorrow. But Kalen knew the truth. He was a historian of endings, and the universe was full of them. He was tracing the faint psychic trail of a Xylosian trade convoy that had vanished 2 centuries ago near the Viridian Expanse. A contract that promised a decent payout if he could pinpoint the wreckage. The echoes here were thin, frayed by time, the sudden spike of confusion, the bloom of terror, then the long, fading note of resignation. He closed his eyes, letting the ship's neural interface sync with his own mind. The low thrum of the vessel's systems a meditative mantra against the choir of the dead. The whispers guided him, faint as starlight, pulling him deeper into the uncharted nebulae of the fringe. But as he drew closer to the Viridian system, a new kind of silence began to encroach upon the old. It was different from the quiet of empty space, which was always humming with the background radiation of creation. This was a deep, profound, and hungry silence. It was a nullity, a void within the void, and it was pushing against the familiar ghosts, erasing them. The phantom screams of the Xylosian crew didn't just fade, they were snuffed out, their psychic signatures vanishing from his perception as if they had never existed at all. Kalen pulled back from the interface, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. His instruments showed nothing unusual, just standard interstellar dust and the faint gravitational pull of the Viridian star. Still a few hours distant, yet the sense of wrongness was overwhelming. Felt like walking into a soundproofed room after a lifetime spent next to a roaring waterfall. The absence was a physical presence, a pressure against his skull. He ran a diagnostic on his echo sounder, the custom-built array of crystalline amplifiers that allowed him to perceive psychic residue. The system was functioning perfectly. The ghosts were simply gone. He pushed the stray dog forward, a knot of professional curiosity and primal fear tightening in his stomach. Contracts were contracts, and credits were hard to come by in the fringe. He couldn't afford to be spooked by shadows, or the lack thereof. When he finally dropped out of short-range warp at the system's edge, the feeling of dread solidified into ice in his veins. The Viridian star was there, a sullen red dwarf, but it was wrong. It didn't burn with the vibrant energy a star should. Its light seemed tired, muted, as if being consumed from within. The planets of the system were visible on his scopes, their orbits intact, but they were visually blank, featureless spheres of gray. There were no swirling storms on the gas giants, no glint of ice on the frozen outer worlds, no continents or oceans on the terrestrial planets. It was as if a celestial artist had grown bored and painted over his creation with a single dull color. There was no energy signature, no radiation, not even the faint seismic tremors of planetary geology. It was a system of perfect, absolute stasis. That was when he saw it. Drifting between the orbits of the 3rd and 4th planets was a shimmering distortion in space, a phenomenon his sensors struggled to resolve. Wasn't black like a wormhole or bright like a nebula. It was a colorless curtain of pure absence, a wave of unbeing that seemed to absorb the very concept of light and energy. It moved with a slow, inexorable purpose, and as it passed over a field of asteroids, the chunks of rock and ice didn't explode or disintegrate. They simply ceased to be. One moment they were there. The next, there was only empty space where they had been. He was looking at the source of the silence. This was what had erased the echoes. This was the static front. A low hum began to vibrate through the hull of the stray dog, a sound that wasn't a sound at all, but a feeling, a resonant frequency that bypassed his ears and burrowed directly into his mind. It started as a subtle pressure, then grew into a dissonant thrum that made the fillings in his teeth ache. The hum was a carrier wave, and it brought with it a cargo of poison. The ghosts he was used to were echoes of a past event, faint and distant. This was active, invasive, and personal. The hum found the cracks in his soul, the old wounds he kept buried beneath layers of cynicism and solitude, and it began to pry them open. The sterile air of his cockpit thickened, taking on the scent of ozone and burnt insulation. The memory hit him not as a recollection, but as a relived experience, a sensory hallucination so powerful it overwrote his reality. He was no longer on the stray dog. He was standing in the crumbling habitat corridor on Cygnus X1, the emergency lights painting everything in a ghastly red strobe. The air was thick with smoke, and the station groaned around him, the death rattle of tortured metal. He heard his daughter's cry, a thin, terrified wail that cut through the cacophony. "Daddy!" He saw her, just for a second, down the hall, her small hand reaching for him through the swirling dust. His wife, Alara, just behind her, her face a mask of terror. He had been a structural engineer then, before the sorrow had burned that life away and left only the prospector. He had screamed at them to run, to get to the escape pods, while he tried to trigger the failsafe to stop the cascade failure he knew was coming. He had promised he would be right behind them. It was a promise he had broken. The hum in his mind twisted the memory, weaponized it. Alara's face, once full of love and fear, was now cold with accusation. "You left us." Her voice echoed in his head, not her real voice, but a soulless parody delivered by the static. "You saved yourself." His daughter's hand was no longer reaching for him in hope, but pointing at him in judgment. The corridor buckled, and a section of the ceiling collapsed between them. A final, brutal separation. He remembered the roar of depressurization, the sudden, violent silence that followed. But the static wasn't interested in the truth of his memory. It offered a new, crueler version. The dust settled, and he saw them again. Their forms shimmering, their eyes hollow voids. They weren't ghosts of the past. They were puppets of the static, tools to unmake him from the inside. The hum intensified into a shriek that vibrated through his very bones, and the will to live, the fundamental instinct for survival, began to fray. The thought of just letting go, of switching off the life support and drifting into the quiet, became a seductive comfort. It would be so easy to join them, to pay his penance and let the silence take him. The ship's alarms blared, a real, physical sound that cut through the psychic assault. The proximity alert. He had been drifting, hypnotized by his own grief, and the stray dog was now perilously close to the shimmering edge of the static front. The sight of that colorless, all-consuming wave shocked a sliver of adrenaline through the fog of his despair. He fought against the siren call of oblivion, his hand shaking as he gripped the controls. The psychic pressure was immense, a tangible weight trying to crush his consciousness. The voices of his family screamed in his mind, begging him to stay, to die with them, to become nothing. "I'm sorry," he wept, tears streaming down his face, the words a raw, guttural sob. "I'm so sorry." He slammed his fist down on the console, the sharp pain a welcome anchor to the physical world. He had to live. If he died here, the real memory, the love and the laughter before the end, would die with him, replaced by this monstrous fiction. His survival was the only tombstone they would ever have. With a roar of defiance that was half grief, he wrenched the ship around, pushing the engines far past their safety limits. The old vessel screamed in protest, plates groaning and systems flashing red. He poured every ounce of his will into the maneuver, focusing on the simple, desperate physics of escape, using it as a shield against the mental onslaught. For a terrifying moment, the ship shuddered, its engines sputtering as the static seemed to sap their power directly. The colorless veil was feet from his cockpit window. He could see the utter lack of everything within it, a concept his mind could barely process. Then, the drive caught. With a violent lurch, the stray dog shot forward, herring away from the edge of the abyss. He didn't stop until the Viridian system was a forgotten speck behind him, until the muted red glow of its dying star was gone. He flew on raw instinct, a wounded animal fleeing a predator it could not comprehend. Only when he was sure he was safe did he allow himself to collapse, his body trembling, his mind a battlefield of echoing horrors. A deep, unnatural cold lingered in him, a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. He felt it in the back of his mind, a faint, persistent hum, the phantom touch of the static. It had marked him. He was no longer just a listener of echoes. He was now broadcasting one of his own. He brought up the star charts, his hand still unsteady. He searched for the Viridian system, but it wasn't there. Where there should have been a red dwarf star and its family of planets, there was only a patch of blank space, an empty data point that the system's navigation AI now labeled unsurveyed territory. It hadn't just destroyed the system, it had erased it, overwritten its existence in the fabric of reality itself. A wave of terror washed over him, colder and deeper than anything he had felt before. He was the only person left in the universe who knew the Viridian system had ever existed. He was a refugee from a forgotten place, a survivor of an invisible apocalypse, and he was carrying a warning that sounded like the ramblings of a madman. As the stray dog limped towards the distant lights of the nearest fringe outpost, Kalen knew that the hungry silence was following him, and that the ghosts of his past were no longer the only thing he was running from. Port Requiem was a scar of light and noise carved into the side of a hollowed-out asteroid, a last-chance saloon on the edge of oblivion. It smelled of recycled air, spilled synthale, the metallic tang of desperation. Under normal circumstances, Kalen would have found the psychic cacophony of the place overwhelming a chaotic storm of greed, fear, lust, and shattered dreams from thousands of souls crammed into one spinning rock. But as the stray dog limped into its docking cradle, the familiar din in his mind was strangely muted. It was still there, but it was distant, as if he were hearing it through a thick pane of glass. The cold hum of the static was a filter, a wedge of profound silence driven between him and the rest of humanity. Zella, the port's only independent mechanic, met him at the airlock, a wrench in her hand and a skeptical scowl on her face. She was a woman built of wire and grit, her cybernetic arm gleaming under the harsh hangar lights. "Heard you screaming in on a prayer. Prospector," she grunted, her eyes already scanning the scorched and shuddering hull. "What'd you do? Try to outrun a supernova?" Kalen just shook his head, the words caught in his throat. He felt fragile, like a piece of glass that had been struck and was now just waiting for the right vibration to shatter. Zella's eyes narrowed, taking in his pale face and the tremor in his hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He gave a hollow laugh. "I wish. Ghosts I can handle." He gestured vaguely at the ship. "The drive coils are shot. I pushed them way past redline. There's a resonance in the frame I can't get rid of." Zella placed a hand on the hull, her expression shifting from suspicion to confusion. She ran her fingers over the metal, then pulled her hand back as if burned. "It's cold," she said, her voice dropping. "Not just cool to the touch cold. It's dead cold. There's no residual energy signature in these plates. None. It's like they've never been charged." She plugged a diagnostic tool into an external port, her brow furrowing at the readings. "Your energy conduits aren't just fried, Kalen. They're inert. The crystalline lattice has been fundamentally altered. It's like something leached the potential energy right out of the material itself." "What in the hell did you fly through?" Kalen leaned against the bulkhead, the mechanic's words confirming a terror he hadn't dared to articulate. The static didn't just destroy, it undid. It had reached into the very physics of his ship and erased its properties. "I don't know," he lied, the truth too monstrous to speak aloud in the sterile light of the hangar. "Some kind of undocumented stellar phenomenon." He paid Zella in advance with the last of his credits, urging her to work as fast as she could. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he couldn't stay here. He was a contagion, and Port Requiem was a tinderbox, leaving the stray dog in Zella's capable but mystified hands. He ventured into the station's main concourse, the Grand Bazaar of Lost Causes. The muted psychic noise was disorienting. He felt like a stranger in his own skin, his primary sense blunted and distorted. The ever-present hum, the signature of the static, was a constant companion, a low thrum at the base of his skull. It made the neon sign seem dim, the holographic advertisements flicker with a desperate futility. The boisterous laughter from the cantinas sounded thin and brittle. He was seeing the world through the lens of entropy, and it was terrifying. He found a dark corner in a dive bar called The Gutter, ordering a glass of something that tasted like rust and regret. He needed information. He tried to focus his mind, to push past the static's interference and cast out his psychic senses, searching for whispers, for rumors, for anyone who might have seen what he saw. He caught fragments of freighter pilot complaining about a new blank spot on the charts where the Cerberus relay used to be. Two grizzled miners talking about a scout ship that went out to the fringe and never came back, its distress call cutting off into a flat, perfect silence. These were the breadcrumbs of the apocalypse, and no one was connecting them. To them, it was just more of the usual danger of deep space. They had no idea a predator was hunting the stars themselves. He tried to talk to the pilot, a heavy-set man with weary eyes. "The blank spot near Cerberus," Kalen began, his voice raspy. "Did you see anything?" The pilot shot him a suspicious look. "Saw nothing. That's the point. A whole sector gone dark. Probably a stellar flare knocked out the beacons. Happens." But Kalen could feel the lie, the small kernel of fear the man was hiding. He had seen something he couldn't explain and had chosen to forget it. Denial was a powerful shield. Defeated, Kalen nursed his drink, the hum in his head seeming to grow louder in the enclosed space. It resonated with the despair in the bar, feeding on it, amplifying his own grief until the faces of Alara and his daughter swam before his eyes. He squeezed them shut, fighting the vision. When a withered hand gripped his shoulder, he flinched, spinning around to see a gaunt old woman, her eyes like chips of obsidian. She was a code talker, one of the data ghosts who sold information scavenged from the network's underbelly. "You're asking the wrong questions in the wrong way," she hissed, her voice a dry rustle of static. "You're loud. Your mind is screaming. It's making the shadows hungry." His blood ran cold. She could feel it. "What do you know?" he demanded. She held out a trembling hand. He dropped a few credit chips into it. "There are some silences that swallow worlds," she whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. "Some stories that get unwritten. If you want to read a book that's been burned, you don't go to a library. You go to the archivist of Ash. Go see Silas. In the ossuary." She pointed a bony finger towards the lower levels, the forgotten underbelly of the station, then melted back into the crowd. The ossuary wasn't a place on any official station map. It was a warren of decommissioned corridors and forgotten storage bays, a graveyard of the station's own history. The air was stale and heavy with the smell of dust and decay. Kalen found Silas's shop tucked away behind a collapsed hydroponics bay. The door was a slab of repurposed battleship plating, and the sign above it was barely visible. Hand-painted letters that read Silas Antiquities and Apocrypha. He stepped inside. The muted psychic noise of the station was instantly replaced by something else entirely. The shop was a chaotic horde of forgotten things. Shelves overflowed with data slates bound in leather, crystalline memory shards that pulsed with faint light, strange alien artifacts that hummed with dormant energies, and star charts drawn on yellowed parchment. The air was thick with the weight of 1,000,000 stories, and for the first time since Viridian, Kalen felt the icy hum in his mind recede, pushed back by the sheer psychic density of the place. An old man with a cascade of white hair and eyes the color of a faded nebula looked up from a workbench where he was meticulously cleaning a clockwork astrolabe. "Ah," he said, his voice a gentle, resonant baritone. "The man who is broadcasting silence. I have been expecting you. Please, close the door. You're letting the emptiness in." Kalen stared at him, stunned. "You know." It wasn't a question. Silas smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "I don't know. My boy, I remember. I am a keeper of things that are in danger of being forgotten, and lately, my collection has been growing at an alarming rate." He gestured for Kalen to sit. "You went to the Viridian system, I presume. Or rather, you went to the space where it used to be." Kalen sank into a chair, the strength leaving his legs. He told Silas everything: the erased ghosts, the featureless planets, the shimmering curtain of non-existence, the psychic assault, the voices of his family. He spoke of the cold that now lived inside him and the way the universe seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Silas listened without interruption, his gaze never wavering. When Kalen finished, the old man slowly nodded. "What you saw has many names, none of them pleasant," he said softly. "The chronivores called it the Great Unraveling. The scions of Altair knew it as the Stillness. I prefer a simpler term, the Lacuna, the hole in the world." He stood and walked over to a massive and hand-drawn map of the galaxy that covered one wall. It was dotted with dozens of small, black pins. "It's a form of cosmic predator. It doesn't consume matter or energy in any way we can measure. It consumes information, history, reality itself. It is drawn to complexity, to narratives. A star system is a grand story of gravity, of fusion, of life, of time. The Lacuna is drawn to these stories, and it feeds by erasing them, leaving behind only a blank page. It spoke to me, Kalen whispered, the memory making him tremble. It used my wife and daughter. Of course, Silas said, his voice full of pity. The most complex and powerful stories in the universe are not written in the orbits of planets, but in the bonds of love and the echoes of loss. Your mind, trained to hear the echoes of the dead, was a symphony for it, a feast. It fed on your grief, and in doing so, it found a new anchor in our reality. Silas turned from the map, his ancient eyes locking onto Kalen's. You did not merely escape the Lacuna's prospector. It has invested a part of itself in you, the hum you feel, the cold you carry that is a resonance, a psychic hook. You are a tuning fork vibrating at its frequency. It let you go so you would lead it to new feeding grounds. The truth hit Kalen with the force of a physical blow. Port Requiem, Zella, the pilot in the bar, the thousands of souls on this rock. They were all in danger because of him. He was the Judas goat, leading the slaughterer to the flock. What do I do? He pleaded, his voice cracking. How do I fight it? Silas's expression grew grim. Fighting it is like trying to punch a hole in the ocean. It is a fundamental force, the entropy of existence itself, but it is not invincible. Every story has a beginning, and its power is weakest where the first words were spoken. He walked back to his workbench and picked up the intricate clockwork astrolabe. Its metal was a warm, golden alloy that seemed to drink the light. This is a key. It points not to a place in space, but to a place in time. There is a legend, a myth from before the first stars, of a place called the Heliopause Archive, a repository built by the universe's first sentient race. They foresaw the coming of the Lacuna and created a sanctuary, a place where stories are not merely recorded, but are made real, their truths resonating with the fundamental harmonics of creation. It is a place the Lacuna cannot erase. Silas held out the key. The resonance you carry makes you a beacon for the silence, but it can also make you a compass for the song. This key will react to you, and it will show you the way to the archive. There, and only there, you might find a way to sever your connection, a way to fight back. Kalen looked at the golden device, then at the old man's weary, hopeful face. The path he was being offered was not one of escape, but of confrontation. It was a journey into the heart of a myth to fight a reality-devouring monster. It was insane. It was impossible. But as he felt the cold hum in his soul, and as he thought of the unsuspecting souls on Port Requiem, he knew it was the only choice he had. He reached out and took the key. As his fingers closed around the warm metal, it began to glow, and the hum in his head was, for the first time, met with a faint, beautiful counter-frequency, a single, perfect note of a song he had never heard before. Kalen didn't walk back to the hangar. He fled. The weight of Silas's revelation was a physical burden, and the warm, glowing key in his pocket felt less like a tool of salvation and more like the trigger for a bomb he was wearing. As he moved through the crowded concourse of Port Requiem, he could feel the change. It was subtle, a chilling nuance in the station's psychic atmosphere. The boisterous energy of the crowds was thinning, the vibrant tapestry of 1,000 minds fraying at the edges. Arguments in the cantinas petered out into sullen silence. The frenetic haggling in the markets was replaced by quiet, suspicious stares. The station's lifeblood, its chaotic and resilient energy, was coagulating. The hum in his own mind, the cold signature of the Lacuna, felt smug, satisfied. It was tasting the air, sampling the feast he had brought it. He broke into a run. ignoring the strange looks, the cold dread propelling him forward. When he burst into the hangar, Zella was standing motionless beside the stray dog, her face ashen. The diagnostic tool was still in her hand, but its screen was dark. "The power's fluctuating all over the station," she said, her voice a flat monotone that lacked her usual acerbic bite. "Conduits are just giving up, not shorting out, not overloading. They're just stopping, like they've forgotten how to carry a current." She looked at him, her sharp eyes clouded with a confusion that bordered on despair. "And your ship, Kaylin, it's getting colder. The ambient temperature in this hangar has dropped 10 degrees in the last hour. It's all coming from your ship." He couldn't meet her gaze. The guilt was a blade twisting in his gut. "I have to go. Zella, right now." He transferred the last of his usable salvage deeds to her account, a ridiculously large sum for a simple repair job. "For your trouble, and for the danger." She looked at the confirmation on her data pad, then back at him. A flicker of her old self returning. Danger, what is going on? He was already climbing the ramp into the stray dog. "Get out, Zella," he called back, his voice strained. "Take the money and book passage on the first freighter heading coreward. Don't ask why. Just go." He sealed the airlock behind him, cutting off her bewildered, angry questions. Inside, the cockpit was like an icebox. A thin layer of frost was forming on the viewport. He strapped himself in, his fingers numb and clumsy. The ship's systems were sluggish, reluctant, as if the vessel itself were succumbing to a terminal lethargy. He had to coax the engines to life, overriding a dozen new and inexplicable error messages. As the stray dog pulled away from its docking cradle, he looked back at Port Requiem. The lights on the asteroid station were flickering, some whole sectors going dark. The psychic hum of its population was now a faint, fearful whisper in his mind. He had been there less than a day, and he had already signed its death warrant. He was a plague ship, and the only cure was to sail into the deepest, most desolate waters he could find, once clear of the station's traffic. He cut the engines and let the ship drift in the silent void. He took the clockwork astrolabe from his pocket. In the dim light of the cockpit, the golden key pulsed with a soft, warm luminescence, a stark contrast to the encroaching cold. As Silas had instructed, he didn't try to use it like a normal navigational tool. He placed it on the console, closed his eyes, and reached out with his mind. He didn't focus on a destination, on a star or a coordinate. He focused on the hum inside him, on the shard of the lacuna he carried. He embraced the cold, the grief, the weaponized memory of his family's death. He let the pain wash over him, not fighting it, but using it as a focal point. He had to make himself a beacon, to shine his darkness into the void. The effect was immediate and agonizing. The whispers of Alara and his daughter returned, no longer mocking, but pleading, their voices full of an infinite, soul-crushing sorrow. They begged him to stop, to give up, to join them in the quiet. The cold intensified, seeping into his bones. The frost on the viewport thickened, cracking and spreading. He grit his teeth, tears of pain and grief freezing on his cheeks, and pushed his sorrow outward, channeling it into the key. For a moment, he felt his own consciousness begin to unravel, the very essence of who he was threatening to dissolve into the abyss of his loss. But then, the key responded, a clear, resonant chime. A single perfect note sounded not in the cockpit, but directly in the center of his mind. It was a note of pure harmony, a counterfrequency to the Lacuna's dissonant hum. The golden light of the astrolabe flared, and the intricate gears within it began to turn, clicking and whirring with impossible precision. On the main navigation screen, the star chart dissolved. In its place, a new path appeared, not a line between 2 points, but a shimmering, iridescent ribbon that seemed to be woven from captured light. It twisted and coiled in on itself, defying the three-dimensional logic of space. It was a road that led through the cracks of reality. With trembling hands, Kalen engaged the drive, syncing the ship's navigation with the impossible path laid out by the key. The stray dog shuddered, not with mechanical strain, but as if its very existence was being retuned. The stars outside the viewport warped, stretching into streaks of color, and the ship plunged into the ribbon of light. The journey was a fever dream. He wasn't traveling through space as he knew it, but through a landscape of pure information, of raw, untamed reality. He flew through nebulas made of forgotten mathematics and dodged shoals of crystalline concepts that chimed with alien thoughts. The path the key had charted was a current in a metaphysical ocean, and it was treacherous. He passed through a region he could only describe as a graveyard of possibilities. Here, faint, ghostly images of ships flickered in and out of existence, not ships that had been destroyed, but ships that had never been built. He saw colony Orcs that had failed on the drawing board, their phantom passengers staring out at him with hollow eyes. He flew through the spectral battle lines of wars that were never fought, the silent, theoretical explosions echoing in his mind. This was a place where the Lacuna had fed, erasing not just what was, but what could have been. The sight filled him with a new kind of terror, a fear not of death, but of utter, absolute negation. The hum of the Lacuna was a constant, gnawing presence. It couldn't follow him directly into these strange currents, but its influence was a drag on his will, a constant pull towards despair. The visions of his family became more insidious. They no longer screamed or accused, they simply sat with him in the cockpit, their spectral forms a constant, silent reminder of his failure. Alara would look at the swirling vortex of impossibilities outside and ask, in her soft, hollow voice, "Is this what you saved yourself for?" Kalen, to wander through the ghosts of other people's dreams. Days bled into weeks. Time had no meaning in the current. He survived on nutrient paste and recycled water. His only companions the quiet ghosts in his cockpit and the steady, warm glow of the key. He learned to navigate the currents by instinct, by feeling the flow of the ribbon through the resonance in his own soul. He was becoming a part of the path, his grief the rudder that steered him. He was deep in a sector of uncharted space labeled the Whispering Gyre when the ribbon of light ahead of him began to fray, its colors dimming. The hum in his head sharpened into a piercing shriek, and a wave of absolute dread washed over him. He looked at his aft sensors. A vast, shimmering curtain was resolving out of the void behind him, the static front, the physical manifestation of the Lacuna. It was moving impossibly fast, and it was no longer just erasing what it touched. It was collapsing the very current he was traveling in, unraveling his only road home. The chase was on. He pushed the stray dog to its limits, the patched-up engines screaming in protest. The ship dove and weaved through the chaotic landscape, the Lacuna's colorless veil gaining on him with terrifying speed. He could feel its hunger, a focused, malevolent intelligence that was now treating him not as a random meal, but as a specific designated prey. It wanted the key. It wanted the story of the Heliopause archive, and it knew he was the only one who could lead it there. He was a torch, and the darkness was rushing to snuff him out. He dodged a thought storm. a swirling vortex of pure, hostile logic that would have shredded his mind and banked hard around the fossilized idea of a dead god. The lacuna was right behind him, the edge of its front so close he could see the stars behind him vanishing one by one, their light simply ceasing to be. He was running out of road, the ribbon ahead dissolving into nothing. It was a dead end. Despair, cold and final, began to close its hand around his heart. This was it. The ghosts of his family looked at him with pity. It was time to give up. But as he looked at the golden key, its light unwavering even in the face of the all-consuming void, he remembered Silas's words. The resonance you carry makes you a beacon for the silence, but it can also make you a compass for the song. He had been running from the silence, using his grief as a shield. But what if he used it as a weapon with a surge of desperate and insane inspiration? Kalen wrenched the ship around to face the oncoming front. He cut the engines. And he screamed. He poured every ounce of his pain, his loss, his guilt, and his rage not into the key, but outward, into the void, directly at the lacuna. He didn't just broadcast his sorrow, he shaped it. He focused on the memory of the collapsing station, the roar of depressurization, the finality of that moment. He projected a psychic shockwave of pure, unadulterated ending. For a heart-stopping second, the universe held its breath. The static front, a force that had erased stars, hesitated. His focused grief, the story of his personal apocalypse, was a concept so dense, so powerful, that it momentarily disrupted the lacuna's own nature. The shimmering veil wavered, a ripple of confusion spreading across its colorless surface. It was only a moment's pause, but it was enough. The key on his console flared with an intense, blinding light. The single harmonic note in his mind became a chord, then a symphony. Directly in front of him, where there had been only the dead end of the path, reality tore open. It didn't explode. It bloomed. 1,000 new ribbons of light, 1,000 new paths, unfolded from a single point, creating a dazzling, intricate web of possibilities. With a final, defiant cry, he slammed the thrusters to full, plunging the stray dog into the newly opened nexus. He glanced back just as the lacuna recovered, surging forward and consuming the space where he had been. He was through. The ship settled into a calm, quiet current, the roar of the chase fading behind him. He was trembling, exhausted, his mind scoured raw. He had faced the abyss and made it blink. In front of him, the 1,000 paths slowly converged, not on a star or a planet, but on a point of serene, stable blackness. It was a hole in the universe, but unlike the lacuna, it was not empty. It was full of a deep, resonant quiet, like a library after closing time. Floating in that perfect stillness was not a structure, but a constellation of doorways, each one shimmering with a different color, a different possibility. He had arrived. He was at the threshold of the Heliopause archive. The transition from the chaotic flight through the currents of reality to the serene stillness of the Heliopause archive was so abrupt it felt like dying. The stray dog drifted into the sphere of perfect blackness, and all the residual energies of its desperate journey simply dissipated. The groaning of the strained hull, the frantic hum of the life support, the very thrum of the drive core, it all faded into a profound and peaceful quiet. This was not the hungry, erasing silence of the lacuna. This was the silence of a held breath, of a story waiting to be told. Before him, the constellation of shimmering doorways hung in the void, each a different color, a different texture. One rippled like heat haze over a desert, another swirled with the deep blues of a forgotten ocean, and a third shone with the steady, silver light of a distant quasar. There was no station, no structure, only these thresholds floating in the calm. The golden key on his console pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, its light drawing his gaze to one specific door, a simple, unadorned archway that seemed to be made of polished obsidian, reflecting nothing. As he guided the ship closer, a voice bloomed in his mind. It was not a voice of words, but of pure comprehension, a wave of ancient, benevolent intelligence that washed over him without sound. "Welcome, Echo Prospector. You are the first to find this place in 10,000 cycles. You bring a grave illness with you?" Kalen felt no fear, only a profound sense of awe. The voice was the archive itself, the consciousness of a library as old as the stars. "I was told I could find a way to fight it here." He projected back, his thoughts clumsy and raw compared to the curator's elegant communication. "The lacuna is not fought, for it is the embodiment of the end. It is the final page, the closing of the book. One does not fight a conclusion. One must, instead, write a better story." The obsidian doorway loomed before the cockpit. "The entity you carry has anchored itself to the strongest narrative in your consciousness, your grief. It is a story of failure, of loss, of an ending you cannot accept. It feeds on the resonance of this wound. As long as that story defines you, the anchor will hold. To sever the connection, you must change the narrative." "I can't change what happened," Kalen thought. "The familiar ache of sorrow returning. I can't bring them back. The past is immutable." The curator agreed. A story once written cannot be unwritten, but its meaning can be transformed. You have been living the version of the story that the lacuna wants you to believe, a tragedy of your guilt. But that is not the only version. You must enter your memory, not as a victim, but as an author. You must face the ghost that haunts you and reclaim your truth from it. This is the only way. Be warned, the memory will be real, the pain will be real, and the parasite in your soul will be there, fighting to keep its hold. Kalen looked at the spectral forms of Alara and his daughter, who were now sitting silently in the co-pilot chairs, their faces blank, their eyes empty voids. They were the lacuna's living puppets, a constant, visual representation of his failure. He had to go back. He had to face the fire one last time. Steeling himself, he gave his assent to the curator. The obsidian doorway pulsed, and the stray dog drifted through it. The world dissolved. He was no longer in his cockpit. He was standing in the habitat corridor of Cygnus X1. The sensory recall was perfect, absolute. The acrid smell of burning polymers, the jarring shudder of the deck plates, the blood-red strobe of the emergency lights, the cacophony of alarms and distant screams, it was all exactly as he remembered. His heart hammered in his chest, his body reacting with the same adrenaline-fueled terror it had felt all those years ago. "Daddy," the cry, thin and terrified, cut through the noise. He saw her, his little Maya, her hand reaching for him, her face smudged with soot. Behind her, Alara, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. This was the moment, the nexus of his pain. But this time, something was different. A shadow clung to Alara and Maya, a deep, unnatural darkness that seemed to drink the red emergency light. It coiled around them like a serpent, and from it, the cold, dissonant hum of the lacuna emanated, a frequency of pure despair. The puppets in his cockpit were gone. The master was here in person, wearing the faces of his loved ones. "You left us," the shadow Alara whispered, her voice a dead, hollow echo of the woman he loved. "You ran. You chose to live while we died. You promised you'd be right behind us." The shadow Maya whimpered, her tiny hand pointing at him, no longer in hope, but in condemnation. You broke your promise. Every word was a razor blade slicing into his soul. The old impulse, the familiar reflex of guilt, washed over him. He wanted to collapse, to apologize, to beg for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. He opened his mouth to speak, but the curator's voice echoed in the back of his mind. This is its story, not yours. Reclaim your truth. Kalen looked past the horrifying shadows, past the lacuna's corruption, and focused on the truth of the memory. He remembered Elora's fierce courage, the way she had pushed Maya behind her, shielding her. He remembered Maya's trust, the absolute faith in her eyes that her father would make everything okay. They were not these accusing, hollow things. They were love. They were light. He took a breath, the smoky air burning his lungs, and he began to speak, not to the shadows, but to the true memory of the family he carried in his heart. I remember the day we met. Elora, he began, his voice shaking but clear, cutting through the lacuna's hum. On that ridiculous orbital cafe on Titan. You spilled your drink on my datapad and then spent an hour trying to fix it, even though you had no idea what you were doing. You were stubborn and brilliant, and you had a laugh that could make the stars seem brighter. The shadow Elara flinched, the darkness around her wavering. The hum faltered for a microsecond. Stop it, she hissed. That person is gone. You killed her. Kalen ignored it, his gaze fixed on the memory, on the truth. And Maya, he said, his voice softening, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. I remember the day you were born. I was so scared. I didn't think I could ever be a good enough father for someone so perfect. You held my finger with your whole hand and you looked at me, and I knew I would spend the rest of my life trying. The shadow Maya's pointing finger trembled. You failed, it whispered. The corridor groaned, and a section of the ceiling began to buckle, just as it had before. The moment of separation was coming. The lacuna was trying to force the memory back onto its tragic rails. I didn't leave you, Kalen said, his voice rising in strength, becoming a declaration. I sent you away. I sent you to safety. I stayed to do my job, to try and save the thousands of other people on this station. It was the hardest choice I ever made, and it broke me. It broke me every single day since. And he took a step forward, towards the memory, towards the approaching collapse. But my choice doesn't change the truth. And the truth is, I love you. I loved you more than my own life. That is not a story of failure. That is not a story of guilt. The lacuna shrieked, a psychic blast of pure negation that threw Kalen back against the opposite wall. The darkness around his family intensified, the shadows writhing, trying to completely consume their forms. The ceiling collapsed between them, a final, brutal curtain of falling durasteel. But this time, Kalen didn't see it as a separation. He saw it as it was a random, meaningless act of physics in a dying space station. It had no power over his story. He pushed himself to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. You can take the worlds, he roared, his voice echoing with a power he didn't know he possessed. You can erase the stars, but you cannot have this. You cannot have them. Their story is mine to tell, and it is a story of love. As he spoke the word love, a light began to emanate from his chest. It was not the golden light of the key, but a soft, silver light of his own, making the light of his reclaimed memory, his accepted truth. It was a song, a quiet harmony that rose to counter the lacuna's shriek. The light washed over the fallen debris, passed through it, and touched the spectral forms of his family. The shadows clinging to them recoiled, hissing and dissolving like smoke in a strong wind for a single, beautiful, heartbreaking moment. They were whole again. Alara smiled at him, a real smile, full of warmth and pride. Maya waved, her small face bright with love. They didn't speak, but their feelings poured into him, not accusation, but gratitude, not condemnation, but release. Then, as the light of his truth grew brighter, they faded, not into the lacuna's nothingness, but into the light itself, becoming one with the memory he now held, pure and uncorrupted. The cold, parasitic hum in his mind was gone. In its place was a quiet, resonant warmth. The psychic anchor was broken. The world dissolved again, and he was back in the cockpit of the stray dog, floating before the constellation of doorways. The obsidian arch was gone. He was exhausted, scoured to the very core of his being, but he felt clean. The oppressive weight of his guilt had been lifted, replaced by the quiet, bittersweet ache of cherished memory. The ghosts were finally at peace, because he had finally made peace with them. You have succeeded. The curator's voice filled his mind, laced with a new sense of urgency. You have healed the wound in your own narrative. You are free. Kalen looked out at the peaceful void, a sense of profound relief washing over him. It was over. But the lacuna is a creature of cosmic obsession. The curator continued, its tone turning grim. In finding you, it has found us. By opening the way to your salvation, you have also shown it the way to its greatest possible feast, a library containing every story ever told. It is turning its full attention here. It is coming. Prospector. And the story of the Heliopause archive is now facing its final chapter. The peace that had settled in Kalen's soul was a fragile, newborn thing, and it was shattered almost immediately. Outside the viewport, the perfect and serene blackness that housed the archive began to curdle. At the edge of the sanctuary's event horizon, the void was no longer still. It was being eaten. The static front, the colorless curtain of non-existence, was pressing in from all sides, a sphere of absolute negation contracting around their small island of reality. It was no longer a slow, drifting phenomenon. It moved with a hungry, focused speed, the full attention of a cosmic predator now fixed on the ultimate prize. The constellation of shimmering doorways, the thresholds to a million stories, began to flicker. The deep blues of the forgotten ocean door faded to a murky gray. The silver light of the quasar door sputtered like a dying candle. Kalen could feel it in his bones, a phantom chill returning. Not the internal cold of the anchor, but the external pressure of an encroaching ice age. The lacuna was laying siege, and its very presence was poisoning the well of existence from which all narratives were drawn. It has learned from you. The curator's thoughts washed through him, tinged with a solemnity that bordered on sorrow. It knows that stories are its sustenance, and this is the heart of all stories. It will not stop until it has consumed everything. Then we have to stop it, Kalen thought, his newfound peace hardening into a core of resolve. The stray dog, a vessel built to listen to the dead, felt impossibly small and frail against the approaching end of all things. Your strategy of facing my grief, it made the lacuna hesitate. Can we do that again? Broadcast a story so powerful it disrupts it. What you did was an act of personal defiance, the curator explained. You defended one story, your own. To defend this place, we must do more. We cannot merely disrupt it with an ending. We must overwhelm it with a beginning. We must tell it a story so fundamental, so resonant, that it redefines its own nature. A single doorway before him began to glow, not with color, but with a brilliant, pure white light that was painful to behold. It was the Genesis door, the threshold to the archive's most protected memory, the story of the first moment, the birth of the universe. I am a library, the curator communicated. I can open the book, but I cannot read it aloud with the passion it requires. I am a keeper of knowledge, but you are a vessel of experience. You understand love, loss, hope, and defiance not as concepts, but as truths you have lived. You must be the voice, and you must become the storyteller. The plan was insane. A poet trying to talk down a hurricane. But as he looked at the encroaching void, Kalen knew there was no other way. What do I do? You must become the broadcast. Open your mind completely. Let your consciousness become the conduit. I will pour the narrative into you. Your ship, the stray dog. Its systems designed to pick up the faintest echoes can be retuned to send out the loudest song. You will not be telling a story, prospector. You will become the story. Kalen took a deep breath, the recycled air of his cockpit feeling sacred and precious. He closed his eyes and let go. He dismantled the mental walls he had spent a lifetime building, the cynical shields, the layers of protective grief. He opened himself completely, offering his mind, his soul as a blank page. The sensation was terrifying, a feeling of absolute vulnerability. Then, the knowledge came. It was not a stream of data, but an infusion of pure being. He felt the infinite density of the singularity, the unimaginable pressure before the beginning. He experienced the silence and patient waiting in the absolute nothing. And then, he felt the first stirring, the first thought, the first vibration that would become everything. He opened his eyes, and they were no longer his own. They saw not the cockpit, but the dawn of time. He placed his hands on the ship's console, and through him, the archive's energy surged into the stray dog. The old rust bucket began to glow, its hull plating shimmering, the echo sounder array vibrating with an impossible power. And Kalen began to speak. His voice, broadcast on every psychic and subspace frequency, was not his own. It was the voice of a universe being born. He spoke of the great expansion, not in terms of physics and energy, but as a breath of joyous release. He described the first light, not as photons, but as the universe opening its eyes for the very first time. He told the story of the first particles finding each other, not as random collisions, but as lonely souls finding companionship, forming the first atoms, the first stars, the first galaxies. He was broadcasting the ultimate love story, the universe falling in love with its own existence. The static front shuddered, the relentless advance slowed, the colorless veil seemed to ripple with confusion. It had only ever known endings, conclusions, the silence after the story was over. The sheer, unadulterated creative power of a beginning was a concept alien to its very nature. It tried to fight back. It lashed out at Kalen, not with the ghosts of his past, but with the specter of all possible futures. It showed him visions of cosmic despair, suns dying and swallowing their children, galaxies colliding in silent, slow-motion destruction, the final, inevitable heat death of the universe, where all stories would end in a cold, uniform gray. All things end. A thought of pure entropy tried to invade his mind, a voice far older and colder than his family's ghosts. Your song is temporary. My silence is eternal. For a moment, Kalen's resolve wavered. The logic was undeniable. But then, He did something the curator had not anticipated. He added his own verse to the cosmic song. He stopped telling the story of the universe and started telling his own. He spoke of Ilara's stubborn laugh and Maya's tiny hand gripping his finger. He spoke of the terror and the pain in the corridor, of Cygnus X1 not hiding from it, but acknowledging it as part of the narrative. Yes, all things end. He broadcast, his own true voice now weaving into the cosmic symphony. That's what makes them beautiful. That's what gives a story its meaning. A story isn't about the last page. It's about the moments that get you there. The love, the struggle, the hope. He poured the memory of his final, pure vision of his family, their smiles, their pride, their release into the broadcast. He was adding the most powerful force he knew to the story of creation, the human capacity to find meaning in loss. It was the final, crucial note the song had been missing. The Lacuna did not understand the birth of stars, but it had feasted on the grief of a man for his family. Now, that same man was showing it the other side of that coin. He was showing it that grief was not an ending, but the testament to a beginning, the echo of a love that was real. The static front stopped. The consuming void held still. It was listening. Kalen felt a shift in the entity's consciousness. It was no longer a mindless hunger. It was considering. The story he was telling, his own small human narrative woven into the grand tapestry of creation, was giving it something it had never had context. It was the silence that made the song possible. It was the ending that gave the beginning its purpose. It was not a predator. It was a part of the whole, a deep, resonant hum, a final chord of understanding, vibrated through the void. And then, the Lacuna began to recede. It did not flee or break apart. It simply withdrew. Its purpose fulfilled, its hunger sated not by consumption, but by comprehension. The colorless veil drew back, revealing the stars it had hidden, their light bright and clear once more. The shimmering doorways of the archive stabilized, their colors returning with a new, vibrant intensity. The siege was over. Kalen collapsed over the console, the energy leaving him in a dizzying rush. The stray dog returned to being a simple ship, the divine glow fading from its hull. He was just a man again, exhausted and empty, but for the first time in years, he was whole. You have done the impossible. The curator's voice filled his mind, and for the first time, he could feel an emotion in it, gratitude. You did not just save us. You gave the oldest story a new verse. You taught the end the meaning of the beginning. Kalen looked out at the peaceful void, at the doorways burning brightly. He knew he could stay here forever, safe among the stories. But his story was not over. He was no longer a man defined by an ending. He had a new beginning to live. I have to go, he thought, a quiet certainty settling in his heart. The curator understood. The universe will always need more storytellers. Kalen, go. Live a good one. The golden key on his console dissolved into motes of warm light, which flowed into the ship's navigation system. A new path appeared on his screen, a simple and clear route back to the known galaxy. As the stray dog turned and pulled away from the Heliopause archive, Kalen took one last look at the constellation of doorways, a silent thank you passing between him and the ancient librarian. He plotted a course, not to a desolate graveyard of ships, but towards a newly charted sector where colony ships were just beginning to arrive. He no longer felt the need to listen for the echoes of the dead. His purpose was different now. The void was no longer a library of ghosts to him. It was a vast, silent, beautiful canvas. And as he pushed the throttle forward, racing toward a system with a newborn sun, Kalen smiled. He was no longer an echo prospector. He was going to help people write new stories, ones that were worth remembering.